It's football season, and you can now get almost anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a running back delivered, but you can get baby back ribs delivered. A strong defense? No. A strong deodorant? Yes. The six-pack of abs? Nope. Six-pack of beer? Yes. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, official on-demand food delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol 21 plus and in select cities. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Visit Blinds.com now for up to 50% off with minimum purchase plus a free professional measure. Rules and restrictions apply.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How Are the Podcast. And the lads are back in action this weekend in a fixture that reminds us of that fantastic day in the middle of August when Premier League football returned to the Stadium of Light as we took on West Ham United on the opening day of the season. On that day, optimism was high as we'd spent a lot of money in the summer, but I doubt many fans would have guessed that we'd be 3 points off a Champions League place and still remain unbeaten at home ahead of kick-off that day at this stage of the season. But there might have been one or two after a 3-0 win that day, to be fair. But on the other end of that result was Graham Potter's West Ham side at the time. And I doubt many West Ham fans would have expected their side to be 4 points from safety at this point in the season. But it'll be interesting to see if that was a case. So luckily for us, we have someone to help us out with that and all that's going on at West Ham, because we have the co-host of the West Ham Way, James Obern. Welcome, James.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, how's things?
Yeah, really good. Other than football, obviously. Seems we might have turned a little bit of a corner, but other than that, yeah, all good.
Well, I was going to say, it must be so much better after last weekend. I imagine you're still celebrating after that win against Spurs.
Yeah, spot on. In fairness, I think if I had to pick one fixture of the entire season to win away against Tottenham, it has got to be the one, so we've got to be pleased with that.
Really, is that the case? Because I know, like in London, it must be because we've just got Newcastle and Middlesbrough wanted to hate us, of course, but we're not bothered about Middlesbrough. But we've got that kind of one rivalry there. But in London, it's always weird because you see Tottenham playing Chelsea and games like that, and you think we up north we don't quite understand what the rivalries are like.
Yeah, I think obviously for us, Millwall is the main derby, but due to the nature that we barely ever get to play them because they're never in the Prem, which is lovely. It means that, second best is certainly Spurs. It's a bit of a strange one, obviously, because I think they'd highlight Arsenal first and then probably us. But I do really enjoy the sort of build-up to every match where they describe it as our cup final and then see the meltdown they have when we inevitably beat them. Because thankfully, we've had a pretty good record since they've moved stadium at their place. So, yeah, good one to win.
Yeah. Is it like that with most London sides? Is there always a little bit of edge just because they're in London?
Yeah, there's a bit of sting. I think certainly with maybe the more traditional teams, your Chelsea's, Arsenal's, Tottenham's, Fulham as well to an extent, but maybe less so the likes of Brentford and Palace. But yeah, definitely there is a bit of an edge to it. And you usually actually get a little bit more fight out of the players, which we've not seen enough of across the season, to be honest.
Yeah, looking forward to getting to that. But we'll get into the details of that win and the context of that last week. But as I said in the introduction, you co-host on the West Ham Way. So how long have you been doing that?
That's been about 2 years for me now. The West Ham Way is quite a big production in the end. There's a number of podcasts that go on there. And myself and Dan Wolfenden run the pre-match analysis show. So I always highlight players to watch, how many we think West Ham are about to lose by. and try and give fans as much of a heads up, tactically about what to expect from the match.
Yeah, and how far back does your love of West Ham go then?
Oh, we're talking, I'm 28 now, probably a good 23, 24 years to when I was a really small lad. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not a West Ham lad. I'm from South Wales. And unfortunately, my old man forced me into supporting them. I had no other choice. I remember coming in from school one day around 6 or 7 and saying, "Dad, everyone at school supports Man United. I think I want to support them. They're a good team." And I came downstairs for dinner, and there was a suitcase by the front door. And I said to him, "Dad, where are you going?" And he said, "I'm not going anywhere, son, but if you think you're not supporting West Ham, you're not living here." And since that day, I haven't had a choice.
That's it. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned before we started that your first season when you got into it was the promotion season way back when.
Yeah, it would have been. It was my first game was the playoff final in Cardiff against Preston North End, where Bobby Zamora bundled home to take us up. Expectations set at that stage as my first game as a little boy, winning a trophy at a big stadium, great day out. I thought, Christ, West Ham's great. This is going to be it for me now. And little did I know it would be a long time until we had that feeling again.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I'm fairly certain that might have been the season I can't remember whether we went down or whether whether we won the title under McCarthy. One of those seasons, anyway, where you were in the second tier. I can't remember, but anyway, it's a 14th consecutive year that West Ham have been in the top flight now. Which, looking at it, it's kind of the longest stretch that West Ham have been in the top flight since the 60s and 70s. And looking at the finishing positions in the table, it's kind of varied between 6th and 16th.
Yep.
So reading out loud, it sounds pretty stable. But from an outsider like myself looking into that stretch, there always seems to be something rumbling at West Ham. Even way back, if it's Sam Allardyce, Bilic, Pellegrini, or even David Moyes, it never seems that stable from the outside.
Oh, it's never straightforward, never easy. And naturally, obviously, with the ownership in recent years, there's been quite a lot of turmoil behind the scenes, and that reflects on the pitch. I mean, it keeps it exciting, I suppose. You can never relax. But, to be honest, mate, the past 2 years have been so poor that I think this season is we've taken it one step too far, and it might be our year, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll come on to that because just going back a little bit, because you had obviously the move from the Bowling Ground to the London Stadium in 2016, which must be great because to welcome all of the sides in London to the London Stadium must be something at least. But unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember Sunderland moving from Roker Park to the Stadium of Light way back when, almost 30 years ago now. But it's coming up 10 years now that West Ham have played at the London Stadium, which, I mean, is ridiculous. It just feels like a few years. But from the outside, it still doesn't look like it feels like home to West Ham.
Yeah, spot on. I think, I still describe it as the new stadium, but you've said it there, 10 years we've been there. It's crazy. But I think, that fact in itself goes to show how poorly the move's been performed, really. I think a lot of fans in general feel quite lied to around what we expected compared to what we ended up with. I don't think the idea necessarily of moving away from the Berlin was a bad one. We certainly either had to extend it or move out because at 35,000, we were starting to outgrow that place. And I can understand the appeal of moving to the London Stadium. But I think compared to what we've got now, compared to what we promised, it's night and day. So it's not been ideal. Obviously, we don't actually own the stadium, which is a major stopper in terms of making it our own. And simple things like making the seats claret, for example, would be a start. Not able to do things like that. And it does very much feel like we're renting a house and we don't really live there.
I mean, it's bizarre that you can't. I mean, are there any other things? I mean, like you can't do other than colours and things like that? I mean, are you just not allowed to touch it?
There's some branding around the place. We managed to get a claret carpet around the pitch instead of a green one. That took about 3 years. But it's tough because ultimately it's owned by the Olympic Committee and by the Mayor of London sort of controls that. And it's just been, again, like I said, there's some branding around the place, but all of the sort of food, all the hospitality is run via that, not from the club. So there's so little West Ham feel about the place that it makes it really hard to make it feel like home. And that's without getting into the sort of actual layout of the stadium itself, how far away you are from the pitch, and how difficult it is to create an atmosphere there. If you gave me the choice now, I'd say knock it down and start again, to be honest with you, mate. I think there's no minimal changes that are going to turn the tide on that place and the sort of general feeling around the fan base.
Yeah, you mentioned the seats being way back, and you hear a lot about that. And sometimes you wonder whether West Ham fans are, because we've only played there once. This is only the second time we've played there. I mean, how much of a difference does that make? Because I know that they try to make it so that those bottom seats slide out and back in again, and all of that sort of stuff. But is it still quite a distance from the pitch?
It's a massive difference, Chris. To be honest with you, it's it's difficult to compare to Upton Park because I think that was probably the other extreme. You were very much on top of the pitch at Upton Park, so that's as good as it gets. In all fairness, so it was always going to be a step away from that. But you compare it to other grounds around the country, and it's night and day. I mean, the away seats in particular, I've seen photos from away fans, and there's, especially in the upper tier, there's probably a 20-metre gap between the two tiers in terms of distance. And it's just not designed for football, mate. It's an athletics ground. Obviously, the track is covered, as you said, then by the seats and by the carpet. But it's just not designed for football. We've, through a number of years of having season tickets and slowly moving each time our seats close to the pitch, we've got decent enough seats now. But again, where we are now, comparable to Upton Park, you're talking 10, 15 metres. It's crazy.
Yeah, because they've got a good deal out of it financially, but do you think it's actually impacted the club over the last, well, they've been there 10 years, but do you think it's impacted them in terms of not having, because we're, like I said, we're unbeaten at home this season because we've built an atmosphere, we've built something, but are West Ham struggling to get that?
I think, yes, I think it's easy to point towards a number of factors with that. Look, the team have been fairly poor, so especially in recent times, in terms of generating that atmosphere, they need to give us something. The shape of the ground, in terms of it being a bowl, naturally does lose atmosphere at the top of it because it's not covered. But I think it does have a massive effect, mate. And I think it's very easy to point towards it as a negative and as a toxic feeling that grows amongst the fans. And ultimately, that does reflect onto the pitch. And when you can't really generate a bouncing atmosphere, we've spoken on our show around our chances of staying up. And you compare our situation to Ellen Road, for example, with Leeds, and the bounce that they get at home makes it such a difficult place to go. And I feel like you've seen, I haven't got the stat off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there's been more games where we've lost by 3 goals or more in the 10 years at the London Stadium than there was at the Boleyn Ground, because it's so easy for teams to come here, kill the ground, and walk all over us, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I was just looking there. I mean, we'll get into it, but lost 8 out of 11 this season at home. But we'll come back round to that because just kind of going back to work out kind of why West Ham are in the position we're in now. I'm just going to go back to David Moyes' second spell because he was getting top 10 finishes, 3 years in Europe. One of those ended up, of course, winning the Europa Conference League. I mean, don't get us wrong, James, you're preaching the converted, speaking to a Sunderland fan about David Moyes. But even though he seemed to be doing a decent job at West Ham, the fans just never seemed happy that he was the manager.
Yeah, I think, look, obviously in the first spell, he came and saved us, did a good job for what the role was. I think there was a little bit of disappointment in terms of him coming back the second time in terms of a lack of ambition, obviously with Pellegrini sandwiched in the middle. And that was a name that we'd gone for. It hadn't worked out. And then we'd reverted back to type with Moyes. I think, as you well know, with the type of football that he plays, when it's working, fans are prepared to just about get behind it. Obviously, when you're winning games, everybody's pleased. If you look at his record for the past sort of 6 to 8 months of his time with us, it wasn't working. We were losing a lot of games. I think we picked up 3 wins in the second half of that season. And we'd had such a good start to the season that it meant we only ended up finishing 9th. So overall, it looked okay from the outside. But when you're coupling poor results with really torrid football, there's only one way it's going to go. And again, I think for people who've not watched the David Moyes team, the most common phrase is, be careful what you wish for. And it's easy to look at West Ham and look at where we've gone since he's left and say that was the wrong decision. I don't think so much. I think the wrong decisions came from who we replaced him with. You look at Lopetegui, you look at Potter. Nuno, jury's out a little bit, but certainly those 2 moves weren't the right ones. And I think that is where the errors have been made, maybe more so than letting Moyes go.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we took some stick about apparently how we treated David Moyes, but if you look at his record, I don't think anyone can complain. But we mentioned that it's 14 years in the top flight this year for West Ham, and I might be kind of asking this almost on behalf of some Sunderland fans who hope we have a long stay in the Premier League. But During that time, were there points where you thought West Ham were ready to try and jump onto that next level and maybe try and break into that elite group at the top?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where a lot of frustration with some of the fans lies, to be honest with you, Chris. You look at that sort of 3-year spell we had with Moyes in terms of the Europa League semis, the Conference League win, and then another Europa League quarter following that of pretty good success. And I think the biggest frustration with fans in terms of the recruitment at that point is that is the time to, if you're ever going to pull the trigger and really go for it and spend some money and push yourselves over the line, that is it. And the ownership were content. And I think it's ultimately cost us. I mean, we went into the second half, that first campaign in the Europa League where we ultimately got to the semi-finals. We went into January with just Antonio up front, who, great servant, good finisher, but massively injury prone. And if anything had happened to him, we'd have been done for. And ultimately it did. Less so an injury, more so just running out of steam because of how many games you happened to play. And I think a lot of the frustration with the fans was, why didn't we go out and reinvest and go again to, as you said, break into that elite group? Because that is the hope. It's all well and good for pundits to say, that's the ceiling of where West Ham can get to. And I'm sure they'll say the same about Sunderland. They said it about Villa. They said it about Newcastle. But you've got to have the ambition to try and break that mould and break into that top 6. And I think that sort of 3-year spell was the best chance, certainly we've had and probably will for a while, to do that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of clubs trying to, well, almost kind of lining up to see if they can take that next leap. But you mentioned managerial appointments, and just want to go back to the appointment of Graham Potter. What were the fans thought when he was appointed? Because Graham Potter's always, how he's come through, he's always been seen as this long-term manager where he builds something. He's not just, you've got your Allardyces or, whoever might just go in and parachute in and save a club. Graham Potter seems the complete opposite to that. But what were fans' feelings when he got the job?
I think it was cautious optimism, to be honest with you. I think fans appreciated exactly what you just said there. I think there was some concerns that maybe his success was more to do with the people around him at Brighton than himself. Obviously, he's coming off the back of poor results at Chelsea and that job not going so well. But there was still a cautious optimism that, maybe that job was a little bit too big for him, but we're probably more like Brighton at that point than Chelsea. And maybe you can come in and build off the back of that and get the right recruitment team in. And we can see that sort of structure, long-termism and stability that the Brighton have been able to develop. Unfortunately not.
Well, yeah, that's it. But, looking at the last couple of seasons ahead of this one, West Ham finished 9th and 14th in the league. And, of course, it was Graham Potter's first full season in charge. So, you opened the season, obviously, you came to the Stadium of Light. Where was the expectation for West Ham fans this season? Was it just thinking, right, another season of mid-table? Were you thinking, right, we can make a go of it? Because surely it wasn't the expectation just to try and survive.
No, I think off the back of last season, Potter had come in at the halfway point. I think there was a bit of a feeling that we were fairly lucky that the 3 that had come up at that point were so bad and that we were never really, under any real threat of going back down. And that the expectation was that Potter's had half a season of pretty much a free hit to get to know his best team, know his squad and implement his tactics. So going into this season, I think there was some optimism. Don't get me wrong, I don't think anybody expected anything higher than sort of mid-table. But I don't think there was any real genuine worry about relegation. We'd come off the back of a good pre-season. We'd signed some players that we were starting to expect from the likes of Potter. You're looking at Malik Diouf, for example, a really good project of a young, exciting player from Europe who came highly rated, and that's what we expected under Potter and Carl McCauley from the recruitment side. So I think there was, again, fairly optimistic. There was clearly still some gaps in the squad, but I don't think anybody expected things to be quite as bad as they have been.
Yeah, and just before we get into the results this season, I think we'll give James a few seconds just to prepare for it, and we'll take a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
New year, same extra value meals at McDonald's. So now get 2 snack wraps, plus fries, and a medium soft drink for just $8.
For limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher in Hawaii, Alaska, and California, and for delivery.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we're just about to get into West Ham's season because, of course, it started at the Stadium of Light, which we've already mentioned. But then, after 1 win and 3 defeats in the next 4, Graham Potter was sacked. I mean, what did you feel about that? I mean, did that feel like a decision that had to be made at that point? Because you're only 5 games into the season.
It's funny looking back at that period because it felt sort of as if we were doomed at that point anyway. And yes, he had to go. Yeah. But in the context now, looking back, it was very early on. I still think it was the correct decision. And I think we'd seen so little in the fixtures that we'd seen. There wasn't really anything to hold on to and think this is going to improve. Obviously, the game against you guys, the Chelsea game, was abysmal. I think fans were waiting for him to put out his misery because he looked lost. There was a lot of reports of falling outs with players. Some of the players he'd let go and shipped out, like Edson Alvarez. We'd lost a lot of leaders in the team. There was a reliance on certain players. He became obsessed with James Ward-Prowse, which was a disaster in itself. And I think, there was no signs of any change coming around the corner. So I think it probably was the right decision at the time.
Yeah, well, bizarrely, the only team that you beat in that run was Nottingham Forest, who was managed by Nuno Espirito Santo. And then he was appointed the same day as Graham Potter was sacked. And he didn't win in his first 5 games, but then went on a run where there was only 1 defeat in the 6 games after that, which was against Liverpool. I mean, could you actually see how things were changing during that little run he had?
Yeah, I think it was clear that, you know what to expect under Nuno. You've seen from his time at Forest and at Wolves to an extent, you want to be defensively solid and a danger on the counter-attack, which is more of a reversion to type of what we had under Moyes. I appreciate that, but I think for the situation we were in, it was what we needed. And certainly we looked more solid, even if some of the results weren't necessarily reflecting that. And it was coming down to, I think, the feeling amongst the fan base was we were losing games because of individual errors more so than we were being tactically inept, that we'd looked under Potter. We looked more structured, more defensively sound, and maybe just lacking a little bit of quality in certain areas.
Yeah, well, since the middle of November, West Ham have had a run of 10 without a win. 6 of those ended up in defeat, and that included a 3-0 defeat at Wolves to begin 2026, which I think just rang alarm bells for everyone else at West Ham. I think a lot of people just thought they might get out of it, but that 3-0 defeat at Wolves. But during that run, I mean, was there elements of West Ham being really unlucky in games, or were they just completely off the pace during that run of games where they couldn't pick up anything hardly?
Yeah, I think, look, it's easy to say, and maybe there is a little bit of bias from my side, but I think across quite a few of those fixtures, there was, some really unlucky moments. Losing 3-2 at home to Villa to an absolute wonder strike from Morgan Rogers in a game that we'd really competed well in. The Brighton game, I don't know if you saw the handball in the build-ups what's his name, the striker? Rutter, the goal there, yeah. And the build-up to that was blatantly a handball, and we felt very hard done by that. So there was a couple of examples in that. Fulham narrowly losing 1-0, albeit a poor performance. But as you said there, that little ending, or the start of January of the 3-0 loss to Wolves was where it went from, we're not very good, but we'll probably get out of it because we always do, to, we're really in trouble here. And that is really, really concerning. You come into the game against Forest then, and you think still now, if we pick up a win here, you're back to within a point. Unlucky on a VAR call, and we throw it away. And I think the problem we've seen, particularly across that period, isn't so much that we're massively out of games and that we're getting battered by any extent. It just feels more like all it takes is for one thing to go against us and heads drop. And obviously that negativity is a cycle, and it breeds more negativity as it keeps happening to us, as we keep letting ourselves down late on. or making silly errors. But hopefully, with the last two results in the Cup and the Spurs game, that's hopefully turning around.
Yeah, well, I was gonna come into the Spurs game because we mentioned that last weekend. West Ham travelled to Spurs in a game actually that both sides desperately needed to win. It was West Ham that took all 3 points with a last minute winner. I mean, how did that play out? Was that a performance that went a step above what they've been doing lately, or did they just go out and do what they do, but they got the run of the green?
It was a bit of a tale of two halves, to be honest with you. The first half was probably the best I've seen us play under Nuno, in terms of especially not just our performance, but our performance compared to what Nuno would expect. We were so solid defensively, didn't give him a sniff, and looked really threatening on the break, and probably could have been 2 or 3 up by half time. And at half time, to only be 1-0 up, I was thinking, we are going to rue this because we won't be able to keep it up. Don't get me wrong, on the other hand, Spurs were abysmal. It's worth pointing out. But it was a really good first half performance. Second half, we weren't awful by any extent, but we were hanging on, and it was clear that Frank had stuck a rocket up their backsides, and they were coming out to try and get something out of the game, and ultimately they got back into it. But I think, back to your point, that last minute winner, from Callum Wilson, we've deserved that little bit of luck, and we've had that go against us a lot of times this season. For as bad as we've been, we have been extremely unlucky at times, whether it be VAR calls and late goals. So it was nice to see it drop for us. But look, I certainly think we were good for the win across the performance.
Yeah, well, Spurs were poor against us, to be fair, as well. But just, based on that run and then that win, where does that leave the manager? Because looking at the squad, you almost think that squad really shouldn't be in the position they're in.
This is the biggest disappointment, I think. As you said, football's not played on paper, but you look at that squad and there's no way we should be in the situation that we're in. And I think it's a mix of mismanagement from the managers we've had in place and the wrong characters within that squad. For as good as some of these players are, I don't think there's enough leaders in that camp. So I think there's been plenty of examples, in fairness, across the last 3 managers where players have let down the manager by not implementing what they're being asked and not showing the sort of character. I think for me, Nuno's probably safe regardless until the end of the season. I think if we go down, I don't see him wanting to stay, regardless of what the club decides. But I think he's there now until the end. They backed him so far to the tune of 50 million on 2 strikers in January. We still need more. And I do feel sorry for him because I think some of the players he's been forced to use, he is playing with one hand tied behind his back at times. And we certainly do need more recruitment in certain areas. But yeah, for me, I think there's nobody else out there who'd be better than him that would come to West Ham at this stage.
Yeah, well, Big Sam's just doing the TV adverts.
Oh God, please no.
But just going further up in the club, because there's been a lot of talk about protests this weekend at West Ham, at the stadium and outside the stadium. A lot of Sunderland fans are talking about it and, how it's going to play out and maybe if it's during the game and all of that. I mean, do you know what's kind of officially being planned, or is there anything being planned at all? And how strong are the feelings with West Ham fans about the club owners at the moment?
Yeah, so from my understanding, the plan is to delay arriving at the game for 15 minutes. So walk in on the 15th minute to try and make that point, because there's been a number of different protests, and obviously the main point of the protest, because the owners know how we feel, it's not to make a point to them, is to try and get media coverage and the backing of the media to highlight the problems at the club. So yeah, and as you said, that the protests have been throughout the season and for the previous year as well now for numerous reasons. I've gone over the stadium movement itself and the sort of feeling that the fans have been lied to. It is a massive one. I think lack of ambition at times, I've covered that as well. The sense that, West Ham will never buy a manager out of a contract. It's just who's cheap and available. The list can go on and on, mate. The training ground is a bunch of porta cabins. You compare our facilities to the likes of, with all due respect, what you'd consider to be smaller clubs in the likes of Brentford, Brighton, etc., who do things properly. And it's you can't compare. For a club that's been up for 14 years, the facilities around the club are dreadful, especially when you consider the cash injection they would have had from selling the Bling ground and not having to buy a new stadium. Well, where's that money gone? So yeah, certainly will be protests. Whether it's going to have too much of an effect, I don't know. I think that the owner's pretty resolute to holding on to the club, certainly for the time being.
Yeah. Well, you did did mention actually that they've signed Pablo for around 20 million. Castellanos was bought from Lazio for around 25 million. I mean, does that soften the feelings at all that they're trying to go big, even if at this stage in the January window that you're in this position, they're still spending around 50 million.
I think, in recent years, the actual spending of money on players hasn't necessarily been the issue as such. They have spent money. You've got to remember the amount of revenue they're taking from that club, though, as well, by not having to pay for the stadium. This isn't David Sullivan reaching into his own pocket. There's been plenty of complaints from the owner to the club, to the fans, saying we can't spend here because of PSR. And a couple of months later, when we're in the shit, he's spending 50 million on strikers. So why could that not have been spent in the summer to reinforce the squad? It's more about the sort of process. I mean, David Sullivan is a self-appointed director of football and runs all is in charge of the scouting, is in charge of player recruitment and the rest. And ultimately, he's a dwarf with a pretty shady past, is the best way to describe him, and shouldn't be anywhere near, West Ham's recruitment in the football side of things. So there's not much they could do other than sell up that I think would get fans back on side.
How do fans feel about that? Spending big really with the off chance that it might not work out and you might go down to the Championship. I mean, does it feel like they have to do that, or does it feel like it's a massive risk?
There is that as well, isn't there? And, obviously PSR and the follow-ons from that, and ultimately the players we're bringing in. There's almost a question with some of these players of if they're going to come to West Ham in the situation they're in. They're either very brave or don't really care. So it's difficult.
Or they're getting paid a lot of money.
Exactly. So I think that there is concerns about that. I think had they not, there'd be even more revolt, though, because it would look like we were totally giving up and resigned to our fate. As, to be honest, at one point a couple of weeks ago, being 7 points behind, it's pretty hard to argue against. We probably are already down. But I think based on the promises that were made of a top-class team in a top-class stadium, they can't just accept that as a fact.
Yeah. I remember when West Ham spent big buying John Hartson and Paul Kitson to keep them up when Peter Reid was Sunderland manager and Harry Redknapp was starting at work that year. But just going back, let's say the last, 3-4 transfer windows, are West Ham almost like a big warning to other Premier League clubs how, you go from winning a European trophy and then a few transfer windows later, you're suddenly in the crap at the wrong end of the table. I mean, is it a warning to others how it can suddenly slide if you get a few windows wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the issue with it has been the scattergun approach without any clear sort of plan. And by having, as I said, that director of football in place to set in stone, this is the way we're going to play, so we're going to recruit accordingly. Regardless of manager almost, you see Brighton, for example, I keep going back to that example of they've shuffled through 3 or 4 managers playing very similar football so that they can continue buying the same sorts of players, and they've got that down to a fine art. Whereas with us, look how the Declan Rice money was spent, for example. And again, I'll go back to that same player, £30 million on James Obern, who is so far past it and not available for the Premier League anymore that it's unbelievable. But, that's just picking on one. There's been so much money wasted on like I said, a scattergun approach with no clear plan, no identity. And then you're chopping and changing between managers with varying styles. So what you've got left is a mix of players who all have been brought in to play different ways, and it looks a mess on the pitch.
Yeah. Well, onto the game this weekend, because obviously, West Ham coming off the back of that Spurs win to break that cycle. I mean, is there an expectation that West Ham come out and take the game to Sunderland? Because it's a bit strange looking at a run that went on for that long and then off the back of one result. Are you just thinking the feeling around the place might just flip?
Yeah, well, there's that, and obviously the QPR win in the Cup is back-to-back wins, and it's the first time we've seen that for a long, long time. And it is a bit of a catch-22. We were discussing it on our own show last night in terms of whether the feeling will be to, as you said, take the game to you guys, or it'll still persist with Nuno style, which will ultimately be sit back and catch on the break. With it being at home, that's another factor as well to consider. The fans will want to see us go and push on. And especially with your guys, despite how fantastic you've been this season, your away form's not been the best, has it? So I think there'd be an expectation that if we're going to stay up, these are the sort of games that we're going to have to go out and try and win. But again, conflicting styles, again, in terms of the players we've got and whether we're able to have the quality to maintain the ball and have the most possession in that match and take the game to you remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, actually, just because we're obviously travelling down to take you on at the London Stadium, because you mentioned our away record, we've got the same number of points as West Ham on the road. But at home, only Wolves have taken fewer points at home. So what is that? Is that the manager's style, or is that just the pressure of playing at the London Stadium? Why is that better? Why is that side better playing away from home?
I think, in fairness, we've been almost as bad away. So I think it's difficult to put your finger on. I think it's just we're not a very good team ultimately, Chris. But
3 points in it.
Yeah, exactly. But to be fair, that's not new this season. The London Stadium's never been a fortress. It's never been somewhere that we've been able to maintain good form. And I think it comes down to two things. Yes, as you said, the manager's style in terms of not many teams outside of the top clubs are going to come and be expansive and look to break us down. They're going to be happy to sit back, and it's sort of two sides who don't want the ball, which creates its own problems. And also, when things start going badly in that place, it goes completely silent, if not aggressively toxic, and it must be a difficult place to play for some of those players. I can't, blame the fans for that, because ultimately it's stadium faults and how bad the football's been for a long time. But it is a bit of a negative cycle, as I said.
Yeah. Well, if we've done our homework, how should we go about trying to beat this West Ham side?
I think you're very well suited to being able to beat this West Ham side from the research I've done. In terms of your sort of physicality and especially your quality from set pieces, it really did make me laugh while doing my prep, seeing that Dan Ballard has the second most shots on target for you guys this season, which is certainly a stylistic choice from Labrie. But it will work because our box defending is dreadful. And I think this is when the manager's style falls down a little bit in terms of, when you look at his Forest team that was so successful, you had Milenkovic and Murillo, who were both fantastic, aggressive defensive players with a bit of quality on the ball as well. I really like Tazzivo centre-back for us, but whoever he's partnered with, it doesn't matter because there's such low quality. Mavropanos can just about head a ball and that's it. And Max Kilman is probably the biggest disaster we've seen at this football club when you consider we spent £40 million on him. So I think in terms of breaking West Ham down, more of the same from Sunderland in terms of being aggressive, getting Robbie in and around those centre-backs to cause problems, and then winning free kicks and corners and capitalising from them.
Yeah, you mentioned Nuno's kind of style, and that it sounded like from what you said, it was kind of sitting in and waiting to catch him on the break. I mean, is that what you're expecting? And if so, kind of who should we be wary of? Because obviously, look, Jared Bowen's been top scorer for, I think, 3 out of the last 4 seasons. But, so I guess he's the obvious threat. But where do the threats come from this West Ham side?
Yeah, I think, on Bowen, obviously a fantastic player and an absolute club legend at this point. In fairness, I think he's dropped off a little bit this season. To me, it looks like he's lost the yard. He's 29 now, and he's had a couple of injuries in the past sort of year or so, and he's not been the threat maybe he once was. That might come down to style as well, nullifying him. But this season, it's not been the Bowen we've been used to. I think in terms of how Nuno wants to play, as we saw in the Spurs match, the biggest threat will be Somerville on the other side in terms of the pace he possesses and being able to be quite direct. He's been quite a frustrating player to watch in recent months because he seems to have all the tools to really hurt teams. But for whatever reason, his final product has been poor, if not non-existent. The amount of times he'll beat a player and then cut back instead of just crossing it with his left foot or just having a go at goal. But we're starting to see that now, 2 goals and an assist in the past 2 matches. So hopefully we can build on that. I think the other thing to comment compared to what you'd have seen in the first game of the season is those 2 new strikers come in, have given us a lot more beef up front. Tati Castellanos will get through a lot of work. Maybe not so much in terms of size, but in terms of approach, quite similar to Brobby in terms of he'll be very aggressive, will chase every ball and will look to be a nuisance. And Pablo is more of the sort of physical presence, will look to win flick-ons and get on the end of things in the box. So I think it's no surprise that since those 2 have come in, we've seen an upturn in form because it's just given us that presence at the pitch that we've not had previously.
Yeah, those 2 made a big difference.
I think in terms of style and approach of the entire team, yes, more so than maybe each of them individually and the quality they've brought. Just having that, especially from Tati, that willing runner up top that'll harry defenders and help us get out. Because in fairness, look, Callum Wilson's been brilliant for us. but he's 33 and can't last more than 50 minutes at most. And even when he is on the pitch, he's conserving energy for the moment. He's not the one to be a pressing striker. Fulkrug has been a major disappointment, has obviously now gone on loan to AC Milan, to a league that I think will suit him much more. So having those two boys who are willing workers has helped the rest of the team get up the pitch more so than anything they have individually done.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Callum Wilson. He is, of course, ex-Newcastle, and they always seem to bite us on the backside. So maybe that's where the clever money should go. But look, you did mention Sunderland and the stat about Dan Ballard, but there was the report on the BBC about Sunderland overachieving with the XG and all of that sort of stuff. But what have you made of Sunderland this season?
Oh, I think you've been brilliant. Breath of fresh air. I think it's a shame for us because Sullivan has often banked on the 3 promoted teams to be poor and to make us not have anything to worry about. So it's a shame from West Ham perspective, but I think you've been brilliant. I was talking on the pod last night about the approach you've made to recruitment in terms of, yes, you spent a fair bit of money and brought in a fair amount of players, but in such a sensible and pragmatic way in terms of each player that's come into that squad knows their role, has a designated plan and complement each other really well as well. You look at, for example, Siddiqui coming in alongside Xhaka to do his running for him essentially, but it works so well. I've been really impressed with you guys, and it's good to see you back up as a big club that you are doing well. It's just a shame it may be at the expense of West Ham.
Yeah, it did give Sunderland fans a bit of a chuckle this week with apparent rumours of Manchester United trying to do swap deals for Siddiqui, and I don't think they've got enough money to buy Siddiqui. But anyway, I'll not ask for a prediction for the weekend, but Sunderland haven't beaten West Ham on their own patch since 2011 when we won 3-0 under Steve Bruce. Kevin Keane was actually the caretaker of West Ham that day. But just to ask you, what type of game do you think it might be and how do you see it playing out? Because the way we've talked, it sounds like two teams who just want to sit in and let the other side have the ball.
Yeah, to be honest, on Arsha, my prediction was 1-1, and I'd be really pleased with that, to be honest, because I think it will be quite a cagey affair. I don't expect us to be too expansive. I think it'll be a game that we'll try and play on the break. I think both teams will to an extent. So I think it'll be tight. As I said, it's difficult because games are running out. Ultimately, we're past the halfway point, and if you look at the gap that we've got to Forest, and especially the sort of band of teams above them, the Leeds, Tottenham, Brentford, Bournemouth, we've got to start picking up points. And it's when that pressure sits into the manager and the team of thinking we're going to have to win games, not just try not to lose them. So it's tough because ultimately, with all due respect, and we've got no position to be able to say this, but a promoted team at home, you need to be looking at trying to get, the 3 points from, but I can't see it myself. So as I said, I'd bite your hand off for a point.
Yeah, like you said, Chelsea and Burnley on the road next after Sunderland, and they're huge games. But last one, James, is West Ham staying up this season?
There's an answer from my head and an answer from my heart. I'll go with my heart and I'll say yes at the expense of Forest.
Okay, interesting. But is there a real, because look, 4 points at this stage when you're struggling to get points feels like a mountain to climb. But are West Ham fans still confident in general?
I think we were dead and buried 2 weeks ago. And I think, seeing that QPR win, no matter how we got through it, was positive. And then the way last week ended has improved things around the place. It'll depend massively on what we do in the next 9 days in the transfer market. I think if we bring in a high quality centre back, I'll be a lot more confident. If we don't, I think ultimately we are down.
Yeah. Well, I assume you're going to the game for the early kickoff?
I will be. Unfortunately, it'll be a very early start for me to get up there for 12:30, but I will be down there.
Yeah, well, I think Sunderland fans might be travelling 24 hours before just to make a full weekend of it. But just quickly, what are you expecting in terms of the atmosphere? Because obviously, it's again, I can't quite decide what it might be because back of a win, but you've got all this going on in the background.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think, in fairness to the supporter groups that have arranged the protest, they've tried to make it very much anti-board, pro-team. And, once the protest's over and the people are in the ground, get behind the team. And they've done a lot of work to fan initiatives to try and get singing sections in the crowd, etc., to try and, gee on the team. So I think from the 15th minute onwards, I think there should be a decent atmosphere at the game. And certainly if we start well, as we've seen in, the European nights, for example, a few years ago, that place can bounce, but it takes the team to give us something to go. So I think, like, if we score the first goal, I think the atmosphere will be great in there. But if it's more back to what we've seen from the last couple of months, maybe not so much.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. But of course, other than the result, I hope you have a fantastic weekend, James. It just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers, guys.
Good stuff. And thanks again for everyone for listening. Don't forget, we'll have our preview on the morning of the game, as well as immediate reaction after the final whistle. We'll also have all the reaction on the Roker Report website, so look out for all of that. But from us, it's bye for now.